In this series, we are listening to the people behind the headlines, the spreadsheets, the layoffs, and the severance packages. Each episode centers one former employee's experience, who they are, what they built, what happened, how it impacted their specific circumstances, and what they believe a fair resolution would look like. This is not about speculation. It is not about exaggeration. It is about giving people the chance to tell their story clearly, factually, and in their own words. Because behind every corporate decision is a human being, a family, a future, and a life interrupted. Hi, Cynthia. To start us off, if you want to go ahead and just tell us a little bit about yourself outside of work, things you do when you're not here podcasting with us.
I'm a mom. My kids are now grown up, but that's been a big part of my life. I moved to Arizona from the Bay Area to help take care of my elderly parents who are here. And what I like to do outside of work, I'm relearning it after being laid off, but I do like to travel to see people and love art museums, movies, hiking. Yeah.
And how did you end up at Oracle? What drew you to the company initially?
So initially, I actually started working at NetSuite, which was sort of a smaller company or mid-sized company. The largest investor was Larry Ellison, and the leader was Evan Goldberg, who had come from Oracle. But it was an independent company, one of the first SaaS or software as a service companies offering a suite of business applications. And I came because I had been in tech for a while in the 90s and the early aughts. I had actually shifted to be a preschool teacher, but then family circumstances required me to have a higher income again. And so I knew someone at NetSuite, and that's how I got hired. I was the seventh technical writer on a team based in the U.S. You know, it was a small team. I came in as a senior technical writer, and through the years, I got promoted to manager and eventually a few more levels up to senior director. And I, along with some of the other senior leaders, we helped build the team to be over 100 people. My area, the people who reported directly up through me, focused on documenting content for developers and administrators, more technical content. In recent years, this was a lot of AI features. And I'm proud. We basically build the doc from nothing. When I first started, there were 1.5 of us working on this area of the doc. I was the half. And so we built an entire set of online help articles, tutorials, sample code. We had a developer resources site. So, you know, we built a lot of the content from scratch. And, you know, these were new features being developed all the time. So it was very interesting and challenging. And I feel like we delivered a lot over the years.
How long were you at Oracle, and what did you give up or turn down in order to stay there for as long as you did?
So I was there for 19 years total, and that includes I had about 10 years of service at NetSuite, which was the separate company, and NetSuite was acquired about 9 years ago officially by Oracle. And so once that happened, we were a global business unit or GBU within Oracle. In terms of what I gave up, well, you know, I think the job, especially over recent years, became quite demanding, you know, and I kind of gave up a lot of time and let a lot of, you know, non-work areas of my life not get as much attention as they probably should have.
Did you give up other opportunities in other companies, or was that not something you ever were seeking?
I mean, I knew people and occasionally there were things that would pop up, but I was never really looking. My LinkedIn profile I used mainly because I hired quite a bit over the years. So that was mainly, I used LinkedIn to find people, not to sell myself. So my profile was pretty blank. You know, I was not really actively looking because it was, you know, it was a fulfilling job in a lot of ways. It felt like a new job over the, you know, every certain period of time, things would be changing. There were always new products to document, and the company was growing so rapidly, NetSuite was. And there was still a bit of growth at Oracle for the first few years too. So it was sort of like there were enough new challenges that I did not need to look elsewhere.
And what did your severance offer work out to be in weeks of pay? And how does that compare to what you understood the company offered in the last payoff?
So the severance pay was not, I didn't expect more because I knew what Oracle had offered to people in the US. Now, I know it varied quite widely by country. And in countries where there's stronger worker protections, it was a lot more generous. So I had the last layoff, I had 3 employees from Czech Republic and one from Spain who were laid off, and they got, a lot longer severance. First of all, they were officially employees of the company for quite a long time, like months. And then they got a lot of severance. Healthcare in those countries is separate from work, so that wasn't an issue. So for me, the severance was 22 weeks. So that was 4 weeks for the first year of service plus 1 week for every extra year of service. So it was 4 plus 18. Um, and it didn't seem great to me, but I realized I saw what other tech companies were offering, like Google and Meta, significantly more generous. And then I saw recently Microsoft is offering voluntary retirement to people in a certain category. I would have qualified for that. And I think that would be much more generous. So it's not a great feeling. I recently was at a dinner where I met some people who had just recently retired from Amex and GoDaddy, and they had colleagues who had been laid off. I told them my severance, and their jaws dropped. They thought it was terrible. So wasn't just me, but I think the thing that hit me hardest, which I didn't necessarily expect because I knew about the severance that it wouldn't be super generous, was the health coverage. So I'm not in a state where Warren is in effect. So I didn't get 60 days notice. So I was laid off on March 31st. My last day of employment was April 10th. And my health coverage was terminated at midnight of that night. And that that stressed me out and surprised me because I had been years ago, I was in HR and, even back in the days of paper files, like everyone always got at least 1 month. I mean, even when they were let go for cause. And so that I found shocking and really, really ungenerous.
So, no pressure to name any dollar amounts, but if you could give us a sense, you told us some of what Oracle offered you, but were there other things in that package? Anything else that we're missing?
So the RSUs were immediately terminated, like there was no more vesting. Whatever had already vested, of course, what is mine. And I still could keep the Fidelity account. I have cash and stock in there. But anything unvested, and I had another vesting date coming up in 6 months. And when I had an inkling that layoffs were coming, I was hoping I would make it to the next rounds or later rounds so I could have one more vesting date because I had, I would say this fall was one of my last big vests where I had like multiple tens of thousands of dollars that would have vested. So, and over time, I don't even know the amount because, of course, it disappeared from my account. But it was, I think it was over $100,000 left over the next few years. So, that's unfortunate. There really wasn't anything else in the severance package. I mean, the pay, and then Oracle offered to pay for 1 month of COBRA, but really by the time you get signed up, that month is over. And I heard from some people who signed up very early that it actually was only till the end of April. So it was really like 20 days. I don't know if that's true, but again, very ungenerous, I would say.
What part of Oracle's offer felt most out of line to what you were expecting?
I think the healthcare, how quickly it was terminated, that upset me. And then I didn't get the actual severance agreement until, my last day of employment. And I just was sort of floored by how extensive it felt like the rights were that I was waiving by signing it, including there was an explicit sentence or two about not being able to sue for age discrimination, which really gave me pause. It's like, okay, there's a reason they put that in there. nobody has firsthand knowledge of how this was, nobody I know has firsthand knowledge of how this was decided. But it does seem, there's been communication among the laid off employees, and it does seem like there's a really kind of high percentage of people who are older. I also observed in my business unit that it seemed to hit more women and people of color. Now, again, I don't think this was necessarily like explicit discrimination. I think it was more a function of there was dollar figures given that had to be met, and then so certain people were targeted due to their salaries or their amount of unvested stock units, but certain people were protected if they were close to the leadership who was making the decision. And those people, from my observation, at least in my business unit, were white guys and definitely not women. And this seemed true in the September layoff as well. And again, it's just an observation. But it doesn't feel good. And in fact, what people always wonder, was there a performance element to it? Because I think years ago, there were small rifts where, it was really just letting people who had performance issues go. And this was not that. In fact, if people with a lot of unvested stock were targeted, which there's rumors that, as you mentioned, algorithms were used to find us, then those people are actually the highest performers, because at Oracle, they don't really give raises in salary. It's very limited. I did feel discrimination as a leader. I definitely noticed a shift. So, one of the things I appreciated about tech, I mentioned the flexibility earlier, is that I really felt like it was a meritocracy in the true sense, not in the fake sense that we sometimes hear now, where, if you were smart and you did a good job, or you were a leader of a team and the team delivered, you were treated with respect, you had a voice in decision making. And I saw that as the company grew and I advanced, and I felt like I was a member of leadership in the product team, especially the team focusing on features for developers. Now, granted, I was more of a junior member of leadership because technical writing is, not quite at the same level as product management and development, but I had a voice. I felt like I was listened to. All the functional teams were collaborating. But that shifted in the last 5 years. Different leadership came in, and I felt like, I saw women being sidelined. All women leaders were not promoted. In, I'd say, at least 4 cases, women who were like senior directors or VPs were put under men, reporting to men who were their same level. And when they were consolidating organizations, and that's what happened to our organization. And then women were sidelined, and it became so that I was no longer listened to in meetings. And certain groups, there was one group within the last several months, we were starting up new processes because we were going to have monthly releases, and I kept bringing up certain concerns, and I was just not listened to. And it got to the point where I felt like people were regarding me negatively. So 4 months in, a man, a little more senior than me, but about my age, came in, voiced all the similar concerns to me, very belligerently, actually kind of rudely. Everyone listened. Everything stopped. And they kind of revisited how they were going to handle things. And I was very glad, because I was like, great, I had to give up. But I felt like there were a lot of versions of that over the years where, and I'm not necessarily, I wasn't always right in what I brought up, but the fact that I was no longer listened to, and I was just viewed, it wasn't even like I was dismissed or treated badly. I was just ignored, what I said, for the most part. Now, it wasn't across the board. So there were people in other orgs who were still, especially the customer-facing teams that I worked with a lot over the years and respected our team because we were very responsive and, but within product team, we were just disregarded.
In the spaces you can control that culture, you were able to, but in the spaces that were outside of your control, that culture felt very repressive and discriminatory.
It did. And what I realized after a few weeks off work, like I knew my stress level would go down when I wasn't working, like that was sort of a given. But what I realized after a few weeks was I feel better about myself. Like I had been feeling really, it had hit on my self esteem. It was a constant hit every day, which I didn't really realize. Just kind of the disregard I was treated with. And, I think if any of the people who were doing this were asked about it, they wouldn't even know they were doing it. It was just an atmosphere where, certain people were viewed as important and certain people were not. And that had not been the case.
It's very subconscious. When we talk about discrimination, biases, privilege, it's oftentimes very subconscious. I might choose to help you without even knowing it. It's always very nuanced and subconscious, which is why it's so hard for us in these spaces to actually identify it, produce quantitative data for it to actually prove that there are these differences.
But I felt like tech was a bit of an oasis.
It's also a male-dominated industry, which...
It was very male-dominated, and that was something I always noticed. There were lots of times where I was the only woman in the room, but that was okay for me. Maybe it wasn't for other women because I actually developed kind of a more male style of communication. If we can be, I would interrupt, I would talk loudly, I had an assertive speaking style, and basically, I was listened to based on the merit of my argument. And over the years, I had respect based on what I had accomplished and, what I had proven in terms of intelligence. And then that just kind of went away over the last, 3 to 5 years.
Are you aware of the petition's specific demands?
Yes, I signed the petition and, I'm aware that it was presented and rebuffed. And then the rebuff from Oracle was that we all individually should negotiate. And so I sent an email just like many others did. They were all very similar and I got pretty rude response, but I didn't expect anything different, like basically. And then what I've seen is that I didn't send another follow-up after the initial rebuff from Oracle to my individual request for severance negotiation. But the people who sent another follow-up email, they then got an email back saying, a few other sentences, but then we consider this matter closed. So it's like they're just, there's no negotiation, which is not a surprise. And legally, there's I had the sense, that there would be, it would be pretty much impossible to win a lawsuit against Oracle. Like that was my sense. And that, they have a lot of lawyers and they're very focused on, not losing lawsuits. And that was confirmed by what other there were other people in the group, trying to negotiate who did speak to lawyers. And other than on some very specific WARN matters, most lawyers did not really even want to talk to someone about this. And the few lawyers who did talk to people basically said there's no chance of really winning.
If you could say something to the people who are still working at Oracle about what happened, what would you tell those? Any advice or final thoughts?
Take care of yourself. It's a very hard environment. And, we as workers are, disempowered. There's not really anything we can do about it. So, and I think this is what people are doing that I've talked to. I've been in touch with former coworkers is just, focus on your work, take good care of yourself. And, if you can, carve out some time to prepare in case you are laid off in terms of, thinking about what you want to do. But, if you don't have time to prepare, you will afterwards. There's a lot of time. So try not to worry about what you can't control. That would be my advice, and just focus on taking care of yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for sharing your story with us and, being so vulnerable in this conversation. I know this transition is not easy for anybody, but we really appreciate you sharing your story.
Okay, thank you.
These stories matter because severance is not just a financial issue. It is a human issue. It impacts healthcare, housing, families, immigration status, medical treatment, pregnancy, retirement plans, and people's ability to land on their feet after giving years of work to a company. If this story moved you, please share this episode, follow the series, and support the petition calling for fair severance. We are asking these big companies to do the right thing, provide meaningful severances, protect people through transitions, and recognize the human impact of these decisions. Because people are not line items, and these stories deserve to be heard.